All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm happy to welcome to the show former Congressman and founder of Country First, Adam Kinzinger. Adam, great to see you.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thanks for doing this. We can talk about all the fun stuff going on,
A lot to talk about, but I want to tap into some of your expertise, and we'll start with the fact that you're a former member of Congress, and here we have yet another big, beautiful bill that Republicans are trying to pass. This is like Donald Trump has done very little legislatively, so this is like everything jammed into this reconciliation bill, and they've got problems with the deficit, Medicaid, SALT, state and local tax deductions. Do you think they can actually pass this?
Well, look, I mean, keep in mind too. Think back to the Obamacare days. Remember, we hit them because they didn't know what was in the bill. This is going to be that on steroids. Can they pass it? Look, maybe in its current form, no, because the House has to pass it. Obviously, there's going to be the negotiations with the Senate, but I think though ultimately, this is kind of my gut feeling, because when I've bet against Mike Johnson's ability to get something through, I'm always wrong. So I think that you'll end up seeing, if they can't get this done, that ultimately they'll pare down some pieces to still claim victory. But look, also don't underestimate the ability of people that are holding out to absolutely collapse and capitulate. And that's what you see, particularly with the moderates, right? The so-called SALT Republicans I was one of those. And I got to tell you, we always wanted to stand up and stand out and actually take something down, and we never did, because the personality of somebody that's moderate is like, okay, we need to work as a team. So I guess I would say, if I had to put all my chips on red or black, I would put it on, yes, something probably gets done. I just don't think it's going to be what this current iteration is.
And I should say, we're recording this Tuesday afternoon, so who knows what the future. Maybe
Right.
they'll pass it tonight. No, so this state and local taxes, these are typically like blue state Republicans. They can only afford to lose 3 Republicans. But yeah, I guess if history's a predictor, is it Donald Trump twisting arms, or is Mike Johnson somehow this great Machiavellian figure behind the scenes?
Yeah, Mike Johnson doesn't twist arms. He's really, I would say, in essence, kind of a milquetoast manager, probably, of the situation, trying to get things through. That's actually some of the feedback I've heard on him is, even Paul Ryan was kind of a gentle speaker. Kevin McCarthy was extremely gentle because he had to deal with a gentle coalition. Gone are the days of Speaker Boehner where he'd take a drag of his cigarette and tell you to, to go a certain place. And so I don't think it's him, but it is Trump. And Trump is now, I think, literally now just engaging in this. This is the thing. I mean, he's been kind of sleeping on this bill. You remember he said he wanted to raise taxes, and then he's like, yeah, probably not good. So, he doesn't really have a position. So I think now he's going to try to exert that pressure. I'm sure that's going to work on a lot of the SALT Republicans. Here's the thing about it too. I've seen these iterations where they're going to raise the cap to 40,000 with snapback provisions. Anytime you hear the word snapback, or a limit in the amount of years that something works, that's a budget gimmick every time, and it's used to buy votes. So we'll see if that works here in the long run. I don't know. Now, I've seen also reports that Tom Massey has called himself basically a hell no. So that's one of, only a couple, 2 or 3 votes you can lose.
And Tom Massey might be one of the only guys who actually means it, who would stick with it as a firm no. But so am I right? So with a reconciliation, I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but reconciliation, this has to be on paper budget neutral, deficit neutral, but there are tricks and gimmicks. And of course, it's going to raise the debt and the deficit, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's why you see, for instance, when we did the tax reform, we had to do that through reconciliation. And you see that certain provisions of the tax reform expired in 7 years, certain ones in 10 years, because the thought between that is, well, at 7 years, the pressure for the individual taxes is going to be so high that it'll probably get extended. And so what you do is you score it, for instance, saying, okay, these tax rates will expire at 7 years. We're scoring a 10-year window. Scoring means that's just like what the deficit's going to be. And so the score comes out assuming that those tax rates are not extended that 3 years. That's an example. Of course, they likely will be. And so that's all budget gimmickry. And so,
Mm.
I mean, I would tell you probably 80% of the quote unquote savings that we would, try to sell the American people. And I mean, this is just how it's done, right? You try to sell ultimately would never end up being savings. Probably the most successful thing we did was sequester, and that quite honestly was just bad for the military, but it was probably good for the budget deficit.
You were famously on the January 6th committee, one of only two Republicans. The other one was Liz Cheney. And of course, you probably saw the news that Ashli Babbitt, who was one of the Capitol rioter who was shot and killed attempting to go through, I think, a window, breaking glass by a Capitol police officer. Her family has now received a $5 million settlement from Donald Trump and the government. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's outrageous. And this is Donald Trump using taxpayer money to buy, sympathy with his side or to make a statement. Look, Ashli Babbitt, and I have compassion for her. I certainly wish she wouldn't have been in that situation, but this has already been adjudicated. Let's keep in mind what happened. She was breaking through a window that directly led to the floor of the House of Representatives, where there were still at that point members on the floor evacuating. And behind Ashli Babbitt, because people will say, well, this is a small girl. What threat is she? I don't know, but I know that behind her, there's a stream of people that were ready
Yep.
to pile through that window. And so we can have compassion and say, look, anytime somebody loses their life, particularly when they're caught up in a mob, it's really sad and terrible. But the idea that we're going to turn around and pay $5 million, which is kind of saying that she never, that the officer was wrong to have taken the action he did, is completely wrong. And, but this is along the lines of let's pardon all the January 6ers too. So we have our own kind of private army when Donald Trump needs them. This is all in that realm.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. I mean, first of all, she's the first through. If she gets through, where does it end? It's the floodgates are open.
And that's the point is if she would have gotten through there, I'm glad you said that because this is a huge point. If she would have gotten through and that officer had not taken the action he did, honestly, there would have been 5, 10, 15, 30 people that went onto the floor. And again, now you have nothing in between members of Congress and these civilians. And I will tell you, there will have been a lot more civilians killed at that point. Now, you could always say, well, maybe they would have just stopped and been in awe of the House floor. Maybe. But they also might not have. And what we saw in the violence implies that there probably could have been 5 or 10 people killed had this not happened.
Definitely. So I'm going to jump around because I only got you for a little bit. And it's our first time talking, first time on the show. So thank you for being here. I just saw right before I jumped on here, Marco Rubio was in some sort of Senate hearing. And he, unless I'm misunderstood it, he said that Abrego Garcia was a gangbanger, a human trafficker, things like that. Now, I've not seen evidence. It's possible that this guy who is we also known as Maryland man, right? Maryland father who was deported to El Salvador without any evidence that I know of that he was guilty of these things. Who knows? Maybe he is guilty, but we haven't seen the evidence. But the question that I had for you is just a bigger picture about Marco Rubio. I mean, I have to tell you, this is a guy who in 2016, I voted for him in the primary. He would have been my pick of anybody to be president in 2016. And now he just seems to be full on Trumpy. What do you know him? What do you make of this transformation?
I mean, this is probably more shocking to me than almost any of the transformations I've seen, because it's not like he's just kind of holding his nose and performatively doing what he's doing. It feels like he's all in. I mean, he's part of this effort to strip 350,000 Venezuelans of their temporary protected status. I mean, my goodness, this dude's from Florida. Like, he knows better. He's always been the one fighting against Maduro and stuff like that. Look, and the crazy thing is I was a Jeb guy, and then immediately when Jeb dropped out, I was with Marco for the 3 weeks he was in. And I thought he would have been an amazing president at the time because he was saying, basically shamelessly defending the role of America in the world. I don't know what's happened except to say, and by the way, even after he lost and Trump won, I had breakfast with him over on the Senate side, kind of talking about, well, what are we going to do? And he was as concerned as I was. And then something clicked, and it was, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I think there's something about proximity to power. Obviously, that's influential. There's something about being Secretary of State and wanting to be Secretary of State. But the thing I don't understand is if you, Matt, if honestly, if you offered me Secretary of State right now under Trump, I would say no. As much as I would love that job, I would say no, because the thing that's most important to me that I would have thought would be most important to Rubio is you got to look at yourself in the mirror and you've got to have you have a legacy. What's your legacy going to be? Right now, it's giving Ukraine to Russia. Right now, it's stripping TPS. It's being against due process. It really boggles the mind how he got here specifically.
It's really hard for me to understand how somebody who spoke as eloquently as he did and as passionately as he did about really big ideas like the importance of values and in terms of America's place in the world and being a force for good and to then flip on that and do what he's doing now. And I wonder if you look at him, he used to kind of smile a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's very serious looking. And I wonder if that is the result of his soul being crushed, or if it's just the new Trump thing. When you take your picture, you don't smile because that's a sign of weakness. I don't know if it's an affectation or a demonstration of his soul.
Look, I actually think it's both, because I mean, I can tell you, having been, in Congress and then having been around Trump, like, when you're doing the wrong thing, I mean, it shows on your face. I think, unless you're a psychopath. I think Trump's a psychopath. I don't think Marco Rubio is. And so you see it in his body language. What's the best picture is when he's sitting there quietly watching Zelensky get reamed, which was actually, honestly, that was a day where I could say I was ashamed to be an American that day, to watch the president of the United States ripping Zelensky in front of him. But you saw Rubio there just looking like a small man with his head down. And that's something on his conscience.
Yeah, you're right. That and JD Vance. Ugh. Well, we could go on and on and on and on. This is a big question. But how resilient do you think America is in the sense of, I think when Donald Trump first came in, a lot of people said, yeah, this guy's dangerous. He clearly has authoritarian tendencies, but we've got these checks and balances. We've got, ambition pit against ambition and an adversarial system. Then we've got state, federal, local separation of powers, all of this. And it really seems like Trump has, over time, eroded so much of this. But what's the level of danger from a scale of 1 to 10 right now? Should I move?
Well, I mean, look, honestly, I'd say the danger's an 8 or 9. I mean, and I think we all have a choice, which is fight, flee, or acquiesce. And I think that's really what we all have to decide. I've decided to fight because, in my mind, I've been fighting for this country for a long time. I would love to hang up the hat, to some extent, and just go off to a beach somewhere. But I think we're in a real danger. And I think it's even more, the funny thing is, not funny, but, ironic or weird or whatever. The day Donald Trump was inaugurated the second time, I remember thinking, like, this is a fire danger, whatever. And everything that I thought, now with the exception of the courts have held so far. That's the good news. And, obviously the big question is, what does Donald Trump do when the courts, does he disobey the courts or not? That's the big question. I think we need to be careful to cry constitutional crisis. We need to wait till it's a real constitutional crisis. I don't think we're quite there yet. But what I see on Donald Trump is every day there is a little piece of something that at any other time in history would be outrageous. The arrest of a U.S. Congresswoman, as we're recording this, was arrested. Like, I watched the video. I don't see her assault a law enforcement officer, but regardless of that, the idea of arresting her is insane. You look at the arrest of a judge. Now that to me violates really a separation of powers issue. You look at we talked about the whole due process thing, and then what he's done to the military. I honestly, what concerns me is I always knew, and I knew this on January 6th, that no matter how bad things got, we had this backstop of the U.S. military. I mean, if crap hit the fan, the U.S. Capitol's on fire, the worst case scenario happened, the military will come in and restore order. He has made it very clear through his replacement of generals and his replacement of the IGs that the military is to do what he says. And that's where I sit around with like, man, is it possible that we could be living in an authoritarian country? No, because this is the United States of America. But I've seen a lot of things happen I never imagined could. Now, here's the optimistic thing I'll say, is for 250 years, we've never failed at this. We've gone through really bad times. We've never failed. I don't think that, now that this is landing on your generation and my generation, our generation, and other generations to defend democracy here, I don't think we're going to be the ones to fail at it. But I think we need to accept the fact that it's going to be pretty rough for a year and a half. Now, the one thing to wrap up, I'll say the one thing that will concern me is if all of a sudden this becomes being seen, particularly by the Democrats, as a left against right fight. This is not left against right. And if you want it left against right, you're going to lose every time. This is those who support democracy and those who don't. That's the battle we're in right now.
But playing devil's advocate here, Democrats could say, we tried to be the normal party that protects institutions. We nominated Kamala Harris. She ran this adult campaign. And she got beat by a radical right-winger. And maybe it's because the public likes passion, likes energy, dare say, likes a little bit of a strong man. So let's fight fire with fire and let's run our version of Trump. Like that would not be an illogical or irrational backlash decision.
No, it wouldn't be. And I guess that I would separate that into two things. If you want to run somebody that's like, got a personality, that's fine. That's great, right? I depends who it is in my opinion, but whatever, that's fine. If you want to run somebody that governs like Trump, I will oppose you as hard as I've opposed Donald Trump. And here's where I think this is the real key. So in 2028, whoever the president is, and I'm not one of these that buys into Donald Trump's never leaving. I think he is. I mean, the guy's 78 years old anyway. But whoever the next president is, I think has to spend that first year clawing back the damage that's been done. And then what I would like to see is that president spend the next 3 to 7 years divesting his or herself of power. Like that is going to be the key. When we have a generational leader that does a George Washington and comes along and for the first time, at least that I know of, voluntarily divests his or herself of power, that's transformational. For instance, there's got to be a way to say, I don't know how, but a way to say that, hey, me as president, I may be immune during my presidency, but not after. Congress, all kinds of stuff you can fix there. We all know what needs to be done, and I think that would be the key if somebody can run. But look, if Democrats just react the same way the Republicans have, first off, I don't think you'll win because I think Republicans are much better at kind of populism. But secondly, I mean, good luck with this union working because I just don't think it can.
No, it is interesting, right? I think the table is set. If the right leader came along and did what you're describing, they could go down in history as great.
Yeah.
As a great leader who brought back America. On the other hand, I do think there's so many temptations to not do that, but to finish the job Donald Trump started. He is weakened, and actually he has shown us where the weak spots are. And so if someone wanted to accumulate power, they could now finish the job. The one thing
Matt,
that
don't you think though, if the next president is like a Donald Trump, they could actually successfully make this a dictatorship.
Yeah.
I think a second president and a third presidency with that intention, devastating. I don't think we could recover.
The good news is, if we're looking for good news, is that as long as it's a normal politician or like if a J.D. Vance, a Marco Rubio maybe, I really think that Trump's hold on the American public, although it's crazy, and I think it shows us a sign of decadence and corruption of the American public, but I still think it's sui generis. I
Hmm.
think that Donald Trump is a unique cult-like figure, and that like JD Vance might run the same playbook and it wouldn't work for him. So
Hmm.
that's the if we're grasping at straws, that's one thing we have is now look, could there be someone else arrive on the scene that Tucker Carlson? I don't know, someone from not from the political world, that's a different story.
Another antichrist, you mean? No, look, I, yeah, I mean, I think Donald Trump is, and I would have, it's funny, if we'd have been having this conversation a year ago, I would have actually had a little more concern that somebody could take the mantle from Trump. What I've come to realize is exactly what you said, which is he is unique. I don't know what it is, but it's unique, and I think a lot of it has to go back to he was on The Apprentice and all this stuff, right? There's a whole psychology of it, but I think what the lesson we learned from that is, I think because people when they look at Trump, they see him as very genuine, which freaks me out because I know this guy is literally lies every other thing he says, and as a Christian, I don't know how that comports with the Bible, and I have no idea how my Christian brothers and sisters can say it's okay if the guy lies literally every time, but regardless, they see him as generous, as genuine. So I think that's probably the lesson. And if I'm giving Democrats advice, Matt, it's like quit staring at public opinion polls, or if you're going to look at them, actually follow them on things like the border, and identity politics issues. But just go out and be a person, because I think Democrats, and I saw this on the January 6th committee, they do business different than we do on the Republican side. They're much more concerned with public opinion polls, much more programmed. And I get it. That's playing safe, and that's actually a comfortable spot to be in. But I think we're in a very different moment in politics. So whoever it is to run, it's not, please God, tell me it's not going to be the governor of California, because he's obviously flip flopping. It's got to be somebody that's genuine, that comes along, that people actually can believe in, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be accused of the great man theory of history or whatever, but I kind of believe that, like, look, maybe Congress is supposed to be the most powerful branch of government, but in our TV age, in our new media age, it is the president. And I think the Democrats' problem could be solved instantly by having the right candidate. I don't know who that
Mm-hmm.
candidate is, but I think it very well could be someone that's not a politician, because for whatever reason, being a politician, talking like a politician, looking like a politician today is death. It's
It's
death
out.
to so many Americans. And so maybe, like, I don't see Mark Cuban or The Rock as being the answer. Like, I actually think if John Fetterman had not had that stroke,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps he would be the person. But is there anybody, do you see anybody out there that has maybe a little bit of that magic?
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't see that person yet. And this is actually, I think, a very important point, because you've paid attention to politics as long as I have. I never remember at this time of a cycle anybody being discussed that actually ended up being the nominee. I
Yeah.
mean, remember
George Allen,
Fred,
right?
George Allen, Fred Thompson, right?
Yeah.
Jeb Bush. I mean, you just look at recent history. I think nobody that is being talked about right now on the Democratic side they may run, but I don't think they're going to be the nominee. And I think, frankly, for people to come out of the gate, Pete Buttigieg, for instance, for people to come out of the gate and kind of catch fire, you always flame out in a year or two. Every time. You can't maintain fire for 4 years. So I agree with you. I think the right candidate could come along and do it. I think I'd give like a 10% odds that it's possible that America gets so sick of Trump that they're actually begging for kind of a technocratic leader. And so it's possible then that kind of politician could come back in. But if we're basing it off of today, yeah, I fully agree with you on that.
So I have to ask you about the Joe Biden news. Obviously there's several books that have come out that are kind of demonstrating something of a cover up among the Biden team, certainly downplaying his age and lack of mental acuity, kind of protecting him, mitigating as much as they can. The media, to some degree, is complicit. And then, of course, we've got the news that Joe Biden now has been, I guess, diagnosed with having like an advanced stage of cancer, of prostate cancer. I don't know what. I mean, some people are basically saying that the lie the Democrats told is just as bad as all the lies Donald Trump has been told. But
Right.
what do you make of all this?
Yeah, I mean, here's the sad thing is, Joe Biden's kind of mental diminishment is manifests itself in kind of mumbling and slowness. Donald Trump's is manifesting itself in chaos and like kind of like he's got energy. I'll give Donald Trump that. But what he's saying now, I mean, if you look at his speeches from 4 or
Yeah.
even 8 years ago, this is a different man that's off his rocker. So I actually think they both have diminished mental capabilities. So we should have an honest conversation about that. On the Biden side, where I give them serious blame is it's less on Joe Biden because I think it's hard for somebody to see their own diminishment and to believe their own diminishment. I mean, listen, literally 3 weeks ago, I have across the street from mine like a fake field, soccer field, and I'm 47, and I went out and I was doing sprints, and I'm like, dude, I got it, man, I still got it, and then I pulled a hammy. Okay,
Yeah.
so I thought that I still had the ability to run like I did when I was 22, and I don't. And I think that's the same thing like there. So I blame the people around him. I know that's a tough conversation to have with the president, but I think they should have been honest. It's one thing if he was hanging on kind of, to an extent, maybe like Ronald Reagan, like the last 6 months of his presidency, there's some diminishment, but we can manage it to this point. It's another thing to run for reelection as that. And this is where the Democrats, I think, have a real trust issue with the American people. This is going to feed into that. I don't know why they have a deep trust issue, but this is certainly going to feed into that. Is that your thought as well?
Well, it certainly does. And there's a narrative that they're not trustworthy, and
Mm-hmm.
clearly. But I also think it is somewhat unfair. Look, I mean, on one hand, if you believe that Donald Trump is an existential threat, and I think he potentially is, then you're willing to do some unseemly things. I mean, not
It's
illegal,
true.
but
Yeah.
maybe you could talk yourself into the idea that the old guy just needs a little extra sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And but as Rocky Balboa says in Rocky 3, protect and don't help nothing. You wake up after a few years thinking you're a winner, but you're a loser. So I'm probably more sympathetic of the so-called Politburo
Mm-hmm.
of Democrats who were, involved in this conspiracy than
Well, and,
others
and
may be.
that's the good point is that decision probably should have been made 2 years prior. And we don't know what kind of a state Joe Biden was in 2 years
Right.
prior. He may have been fully invigorated, ready to go, and then diminished a lot in those last 2 years. And by that point, it's too late to all of a sudden call a primary.
He definitely got worse,
Yeah.
progressively worse. That is pretty clear. And then he also had the ability, I compare it to the Baltimore Orioles, where what happened to the rebuild. I mean, there might be a night that they look really good. And Joe Biden went out there and gave that State of the Union, and he did well. And maybe you think, okay, we just got to. If he has one good debate, and we're back in this thing, we're back to 500 ball. But then next thing you know, it's a disaster.
Yeah, yeah. It was look, it was bad. And honestly, there's people that have this sense that it was a blowout in the election. And really I always say, look, if a bird would have sneezed a different way like 2 Tuesdays prior to the election, I mean Kamala would have won. It's like butterfly effect because it was a 1% game pretty much down the row. I mean, it's like, 1 week Kamala would have won, the next week Trump
Yeah.
would have, and we rolled the dice on the wrong week. And but yeah, I mean, it was a much closer race than I think it seems like, even though Trump won fair and square and he actually won the popular vote, which was first time in
Yeah.
a while.
Speaking of which, I mean, I had the sense that Kamala, first of all, initially I thought Kamala Harris was a horrible politician,
Mm-hmm.
and this was an obvious act of desperation. And the part of the reason Biden kept running was he knew Kamala was the heir apparent and could not win, right? So that was my initial reaction. Then she starts running and she's up there going, if you got something to say it to my face. And I'm like, she could win. This is awesome, And it was pretty inspiring. And look, I wanted Shapiro, but she ends up picking the guy whose name nobody can remember anymore, even if we don't have dementia. And Tim Walz, and they're doing great. They've got a really good convention. And then they hide Tim Walz for reasons I still don't quite understand. And then they go back to talking about liberal democracy and fascism. And I haven't read all those postmortem books, but do you understand why they change strategies like that?
I've got huge frustration. So look, I think Kamala was actually a really good candidate. And I was with you at the beginning. I was like, oh man, this is going to be rough. As I got to know her a little bit on the trail, what actually impressed me is she's genuine. She was like really scared of Donald Trump being president. It wasn't an act. She understood the stakes. I thought, the fact that she talked about a lethal military at the Democratic convention was important.
And she owns a gun.
Owns a gun, like unabashed patriot. The bad thing is she ran as a big lefty at one point and she only had 100 days to redefine herself. Here's my big frustration, Matt, is the campaign's utter lack of outreach to men. Okay, we have a problem with young men in this country in terms of, and I could give you a 10-minute spiel on why, but I'll just say this for this discussion. Men felt so disaffected the last 10 years because they were told that everything masculine was toxic. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump comes along with actual toxic masculinity. But in the absence of any other definition, they're attracted to him. And so this campaign should have actually spent their effort reaching out to men. So when they had Tim Walz out hunting, they made fun of his orange vest and he looked kind of goofy. And by the way, 2 hunting pictures, even a month of hunting or being a man isn't going to change this. This is probably a 5 to 10 year project. But they should have had him out there more. They barely utilized me, and I'm not complaining because it's not an ego thing. And I frankly was happy to not be used in that capacity. But like, they would do these, constant women events, which is great. We want women events, but the Democrats were winning women significantly. Their weak part was men. And so I honestly think they had a hard time shifting gears from how they used to campaign to how they need to campaign today. And I had made a brief mention about identity politics, and this is part of it, getting away from that and going back to the middle class, saying it's okay to reach out to men. And that's how you win again.
And let's be honest, nominating a black woman to be your nominee doesn't actually help that problem, probably, right?
Yep, exactly. So that's where you have to reach out even double.
So I completely agree with everything that you've just said. But the thing I don't understand, now look, I am not a poster boy for masculinity, right? I mean, obviously, I'm not that guy, even though my dad was a 6'1" prison guard who killed 3 deer one year, and legally, muzzleloader, rifle, and bow and arrow. My dad was like a man's man kind of guy. I was more on the Atari. But and I've got 2 sons, smoking hot wife. I don't feel like a victim. And but part of being a conservative, I was always told, was don't bitch, don't whine, don't complain. Being a man is life sucks. Get a fucking helmet. But I didn't I'm not worried about the Democrats or the left keeping me down or keeping my sons from being successful. Why are all these tough guys so worried about the world, putting them in promoting women over them or whatever?
I'm so glad you brought this up. So I actually wrote an article on my Substack yesterday, and I put out a YouTube video today on this exact subject. And I said, I am just tired.
What are the odds of that?
I know. I'm I am just tired of the whining, right? Listen, Matt, Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the world, yet his currency is victim. He is always a victim. If you're in the media and you ask a hard question, I mean, he's president, you're going to get a hard question. You're unfair. If you're a critic, you're a traitor. If you're, whatever it is, and that whiny victim thing has somehow become a masculine trait. I mean, you've seen it too. You're on Instagram, or I don't look at TikTok, but you're on TikTok or whatever, and you see all these so-called alpha males with their they always have sunglasses and a beard, and their profile picture is always a selfie in the car. And they're, for whatever reason, but they're like bitching about minorities or women or, Andrew Tate, we need to tell women who's really in charge. Like, I don't get the threat either. I mean, it's one of the things I came to on my evolution on, where I stood on gay marriage before I got elected is like, if gay people get married, does that have any impact on my life? No. Right?
Yeah.
If a black person has rights, does that have any impact on my life? No. Now, if we start giving preference to people over folks, well, yeah, then we can have an issue. But white people, I got to tell you, we have a pretty good life in the U.S., and our race certainly doesn't hold us back. That's the best way to put it. So there are people in challenging circumstances, but I don't get it either. I don't get what this.
Yeah. Well, with the gay marriage thing, I just never I totally get, like, you could say, like, as part of my faith, I don't believe in that, but like what I never got was the passion behind it. It's like, if that's my top issue, like, then that says something about you, I think. If you're waking up in the morning and the first thing you're thinking about is stopping gays, I'm like, that's more chicks for me. That's, as a single guy, that was my philosophy. And it just seems like the rational thing to think. But the other these manly guys are different, but you're totally right. I mean, if there is a type, there's a type of dude, and it's the sunglasses and the hat and the goatee and all that. And I'm telling you, it's got to be 99% are Trump voters. Totally. Minimum. I could pick them out.
The weird thing is, like, so I grew up in a house. My father, he only had a baseball bat under his bed. Okay. Then he got a gun when I was gone. And, he and my mom still alive. And now he talks about, I love my dad. If you're listening, Dad, no offense, but he always talks about carrying his gun around in public, and boy, he can't leave home without his gun because X, Y, and Z. And I conceal carry just because of my security issues. But like, what I realized in that is, look, I grew up in a dangerous time, and Dad kept a baseball bat under the bed. So as you start to inculcate yourself in this gun culture, in this fear culture, right? And what is the main thing that Jesus in the Bible warns against is fear. And fear is being peddled like currency. Then all of a sudden you're in a real dark place, and everything, everything's a nail and you're a hammer.
It's actually very unchristian, so much of this, including fear, the scarcity mentality. It's also anti-conservative based on, I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh, and back in the day, before Trump came along, he was all about, like, don't let anybody tell you can't be successful. You can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You are not a victim. He had this power of positive thinking mentality, and you can argue that, like, that's not true, or that's, whatever, but at least it wasn't victimhood. It was not victimhood.
Yeah, and that's where, it's funny because you and I are in the same boat where people will act like we've left the party. And it's like, sure, but listen, conservatism, we haven't left conservatism. Conservatism it doesn't exist except in a very small group of people. What you have in the GOP is not conservative whatsoever. Driving the debt up, authoritarianism. Like, this is the old Reagan quote where he says, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. And, I say that often to people, like, look back at my statements when I was in Congress in 2012 and compare them to what I'm saying today. You'll see some significant consistency with the exception of some maturity. Now look at my colleagues' statements and tell me who is actually being true to their principles, right?
Amen. It's a pleasure talking to you. How can, you've got a much larger platform than I do, but let's send some of our people your way nonetheless. How can they read you, follow you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, go to, Adam Kinzinger on Substack. It's a great one. I've got a YouTube now. We just opened it like a month ago, and I'm putting out a lot of cool stuff out there. I think it's cool. And then, X and Blue Sky and all that. And but it was really good being with you, my man. We got to do this more often.
I'd love to. Let's grab a beer or a coffee someday when we're in the same place, and keep in touch. Adam Kinzinger, thanks for coming on the podcast.
You bet.